I'll introduce our next speaker, and definitely a gentleman that I've learned a lot from over the years. And his name is Julio Ripoll, WD4R, one of the founder of the amateur radio operation at WX4 NHC, the amateur radio station at the National Hurricane Center. I've been involved with him now for 12 years. It's been a great partnership, not only with our VoIP Hurricane Net, but also with our operations at WX1BOX, the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Taunton, Mass. Amateur radio station. And as Bob's already alluded to, we've had a little action on that front in the last few years from a tropical system perspective. So with that, I'll turn it over to Julio.
Well, thank you very much for making the effort and taking the time to come and watch our presentations here. And I echo how important you all have been to the Hurricane Center, sending in all your reports for the past 36 years. So my name's Julio Ripoll. My call sign is WD4R. Been a ham since 1976. So we're talking about the hurricane season of last year, and mainly with the Florida perspective. And as you can see, we had 11 tropical cyclones, 4 were hurricanes, and 2 reached major hurricane strength. But it looks like most of the tropical systems hit Canada. That's why Bob was here this year to explain why that happened. And it appears that 2014 also affected Canada greatly with Hurricane Arthur, which hit Nova Scotia. And that was one of the great examples of the partnership between the National Hurricane Center in Miami and the Canadian Hurricane Center, where we actually spoke directly to each other during the hurricane as it made landfall there. So meanwhile in Florida, we haven't seen or felt hurricanes for a few years now. It's because of La Nina, as Bob explained. And he also explained La Nina is becoming what we call La Nada, which is nothing or neutral, and will turn into El Nino soon. So let's not keep our guard down. Let's remember that things could happen. And here in Florida, this is what could happen. Florida is the leading state of landfalling hurricanes, with 114 hurricanes falling, 37 of them major hurricanes. Texas following with 64, with 19 majors, Louisiana with 57 and 20. So while you're visiting Florida, don't forget the new hurricane evacuation plan. Very important. So who we are and what we do. Well, we started with an invitation from Dr. Neil Frank back in 1980. And he said, you know, every time a hurricane hits the Caribbean, we can't get in touch with them. Everything goes down. Back then we were using radio teletype, and they just shut down. So he says, let's get some hams in here so they can talk directly to people on the island. So that's when we started, and they picked up somebody that could walk across the street. You'll notice where the Hurricane Center was located, in a high-rise building, okay, on the 6th floor, the only floor with hurricane shutters. That wasn't that good during Hurricane Andrew in 1992. I'll explain that later. This was our first basic setup here, and we would just basically bring our radio equipment in, put it on one of the forecaster's desk. If anybody can decipher the formulas behind there, you win the lottery. And we would just basically run a long wire antenna out the window on the 6th floor. And that was the young ham that started there. And the first radio used, by the way, was a Yaesu FT101EX, which he would bring across the street from the University of Miami in a cardboard box. That's how the humble beginnings of the station. Eventually we thought, well, what if we get hit directly with a hurricane? It hadn't happened for many years. So we built a Go Kit in an aluminum box, and it weighed close to 200 pounds. So it never went anywhere. But here again, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew substantially damaged that high-rise building. We had leaks everywhere, ceiling tiles falling down. All the antennas basically flew off the roof of this 12-story building. One of the generators actually ended up down on the ground on the parking lot. That's how bad it was. And of course, the Doppler antenna dome flew into pieces. So the government decided that, well, it's about time the Hurricane Center got a hurricane-proof building. So in 1995, they built a hurricane-proof building. It's actually built with 10-inch thick steel reinforced walls, solid concrete. Okay, and it's up above the floodplain. And then there are 2 rooms which are EF5 tornado-proof. They're 20-inch thick concrete reinforced steel walls, and they're disguised as bathrooms. So if you see people running to the bathroom, it's, you know, it's probably time for everybody to go to the bathroom. So when we built the Hurricane Center there, it was during the busiest season at that time on record, which we had 18 named storms. At the same time, we're pulling through about 3,000 foot of coax cable from the roof to 7 antennas. And the Hurricane Center has computer access flooring, which is hollow. It's only about 1.5 feet, and we're pulling all that stuff through there. Just a matter of fact, the Hurricane Center had been through 2 eyes of hurricanes, and that was both in 2005, Katrina and Wilma. And that's the time when you saw all the hurricane forecasters who hadn't been in the eye of the storm running out there to look up. Yeah, we're in it. So this is the Hurricane Center here. It's a state-of-the-art facility. We have 2 large diesel generators and enough fuel to power the Hurricane Center for about 3 weeks without any commercial power at all. This year, for the first time in about 20 years, Yaesu, which is the first radio company, the first radio we used at the Hurricane Center, donated a new complete station. So we got one of the state-of-the-art HF and VHF and UHF stations there. We're running about 600 watts of output right now, so hopefully you guys can hear us. And all the equipment there, including the antennas, which were specifically designed for 150-mile-per-hour winds, were donated by private companies. And just a little factoid there about hurricanes and antennas. When we had Hurricane Wilma hit us directly, and that was a strange hurricane that came from the west over the Everglades with a lot of debris. All our antennas stayed up, and only 2 verticals got bent, but everything stayed up on the air. All the satellite dishes blew into pieces. They flew everywhere. This is the digital side here, and we do a bunch of digital modes. We don't do them all, but we do Echolink, of course, which Robert will explain later. IRLP, which is basically a bunch of VHF, UHF repeaters connected through the internet. So we have both RF and internet going at the same time. We do HF WindLink. And that was, Dr. Nab was explaining about that sailboat during Hurricane Adrian. That sailboat had sent me an email through WindLink. It says, we are in the eye of the storm, here are our weather data readings. And so I said, okay, fine, I showed them. And it was coincidental, the next day they were having their big conference with all the hurricane forecasters to put together the historical track of Adrian. And Dr. Nab and Max Mayfield called me and says, is there any way you can get the data drum from that station? I had no idea. Here's a sailboat in the middle of nowhere. And I said, well, I can try. So I sent a WindLink email, which, if you don't know what WindLink is, basically it's email like you and I use over the internet, but it's actually over HF radio. It converts it into tones, bounces off the ionosphere, back down to Earth, and that sailboat answered back within the hour with the entire data dump for the last 24 hours of that hurricane. And Dr. Nab called me and says, you realize what this does? I said, no, I really didn't know. He says, well, we just told everybody the hurricane landed in the wrong country. I said, oh my God. But he quickly fixed that, and I'll tell you another couple stories about related things like that where ham radio made a large impact. We have approximately 30 operators. They're all hand-picked. They come from all unique backgrounds. We have a cardiologist that was the head of cardiology for a large hospital, a surgeon, a couple engineers, 1 architect, people from the federal government, some retired, some active duty, some military veterans. I mean, you have a cross-section of everything you can imagine. And then a couple guys from New England that come down to Florida in shorts, which is required. And so we get on the air, sometimes we have as many as 4 operators going at a time, depending on where the landfall is and how much information is coming back to us. And we need that many people because we're handling on HF, the Hurricane WatchNet, the VOIP on another computer. Then we have VHF, if it's hitting us locally. We also have to communicate to the local agency, the Emergency Operations Center. I mean, we may have things going on, and then we have someone doing all the digital work. So it can get very hectic there. So in 36 years, we've been under 9 Hurricane Center director, and we have handled over 100 hurricanes and thousands of report. As an example, just Hurricane Sandy alone was 400 reports for that one storm. And like someone mentioned here, it's a curious fact. Ever since Dr. Knapp became our director, we haven't had any hurricanes. So let's hope it continues for many years to come. Our purpose and goals, basically to collect surface reports. And those are reports from people like you that are actually in the storm, or you can relay reports and we don't hear everything. So you may be where the signal is falling from the Caribbean in a best place, and we had relays on the Hurricane WatchNet as far west as Nevada, and even as far north as Canada, where we couldn't hear them directly, especially like if it hit Bermuda, and they would be relaying those reports. And those reports are very special because they're in real time, and it lets them know how far out the winds go, the barometric pressure, which way is it going, up or down, is the storm veering at all from one way or the other. Second thing is we actually do provide backup emergency communications for the Hurricane Center. If we get a direct hit, that's happened a few times, our power usually does not go out because we have 2 massive generators back there, and 2 of our antennas are wire antennas. And the reason we use wires instead of big beams, they can flex. They don't break, they don't fly away, and they can fly in the wind like a flag, and we still get through. One time we had a call from the hurricane hunter. It was going through the eye of one of the hurricanes there and got hit by lightning. You were on the air, I believe, at that time. And we have special frequencies and permissions as amateur radio operators to talk directly to the hurricane hunters. They have 2 radio positions in their planes, and one of them, the captain told me, it's tuned in to 14,325. And he says, if we're going to take a dip, we're going to put our coordinates there because we know 50 hams are going to hear it. Third thing is we actually provide advisories over the ham radio for people in the storms. And you think, well, nowadays, I mean, we have internet, we have all the advisories on there, we watch the news and all that. Well, if you're in the Yucatan and Hurricane Michelle's coming at you, it's a Category 5, and all you have is a little AM radio, well, that actually happened. And our reports, which were going through the Hurricane WatchNet on HF, this Mexican ham was taking those reports and giving it to their local AM broadcast station, little radio station right in the Yucatan. All those little fishing villages along, they had no other way of receiving that information. So that's another thing that we do. And then, of course, the last thing is to promote and enhance the accuracy and availability of weather data surface reports. We'd like you all to have a weather station. Call us in when you're experiencing the hurricane or near hurricane, or even if you're not, if you're in the outskirts, say, I only have 20-mile-per-hour winds. That way they know how far that wind field goes. And I believe you're going to talk a little more about weather stations in your presentation. And overall, everybody's here because we're on one mission together. We want to help save lives. So how do ham radio operators help during the hurricane season? So here's some examples. We have a vast network. We don't do it all. We depend on everybody here. And the way that they participate, a lot of them is through networks or nets. Hurricane WatchNet being one that we use since our very beginning on HF. Then the VOIP Hurricane Net, which is a combination of IRLP, Echolink, I believe we combine a few other digital modes now. And we also have local nets. If we get hit in South Florida, and even as far as Naples, we'll be connected to their local nets and find out what's happening on the ground. Then there's other things like NHC and CWOP, and that's also for hams and non-hams. You have a weather station, you can beacon your weather every 15 minutes to a national map. And we receive that at the Hurricane Center, and we actually look at it. And we can tell what is happening at that moment in time and even dump all your weather data. This is many different ways to contact us during a hurricane. That's on our website, so you don't have to copy it down. If you need this information, you can print right from our website, wx4nhc.org. Hurricane WatchNet. I can't say enough about them. We've been together since day one. When we started, you've been around since 1965. Okay, and I'll let you give the history lesson on that. But Bobby Graves is here. He's the net manager from Mississippi. And I mean, it's invaluable what they provide, because we cannot, number one, we can't hear everything because of propagation. And number two, we're limited in the number of operators we can have there. We can't conduct the net and look at this and print that. And we actually hand carry our reports to the hurricane forecaster on duty. Okay, we don't email it or anything like that. Or we actually walk across from our room to the Hurricane Center room, and we have our own clipboard there with all the data that they have. And if there's anything special, they always tell us, bring it to their attention. And sometimes they do. And of course then, the VoIP Hurricane Net, and I believe we started back in 2004. Okay, and that was Hurricane Ivan was hitting the island of Grenada. And it was the weirdest thing, because I always thought, at that time being, if it's not HF, if it's not RF, it's gonna go down. Internet's gonna go down. Well, it just so happened during that hurricane hitting Grenada, we had no propagation, we couldn't hear them at all, but we could hear another ham in St. Lucia. That ham in St. Lucia had a 40-meter connection on 7 megahertz, okay, to Grenada. So he would take their reports and he would relay over the VoIP net, which then we could get on our computers. So all this relaying, all this linking got the message through back and forth, which was very important because they did get hit very hard. And that's when the president or prime minister of Grenada was actually put off the ship into a cruise ship, if you remember that. They didn't think he'd be safe on the island. There's many other ways you can send us reports. CWOP, please, you can look at it online there. There's a free program that you can download if you have a weather station that does all the hard work for you as far as formatting information and putting it on the NOAA's Mesonet site. And on that, we would click on, if you're a ham operator, you can also use APRS. We would click on there to have your call sign and a unique number that we assign to you. And we can get your real-time data. We can also get your last 12 or 24 hours of data there. And we've used that extensively, especially on the U.S. landfalling storms. And you can tell, like Hurricane Charlie when it was coming across from the west, and you see all the wind vanes and pointing, and you see the format of the eye. And of course, the backside of the eye had nothing, because those stations either blew away or went off the air. But you can see the pattern of the wind coming through there. So here's a few examples of surface reports and some examples of the forms we use at the Hurricane Center. And in the packet, I gave you one of the forms that we use, and not only can you use it to actually write it down what you need, but it's the format we actually present, and the hurricane forecasters like that format. Okay, for non-hams or even hams, you can fill out that form online, hit send, and it prints out right at our station. Okay? And then this is the form that we use. For instance, when we get reports on HF, we actually write down the reports. It's a good reference to use because we can tell if something's missing. In the heat of the battle, you got 3, 4 things going on. You have several signals on the air, and we can come back and say, wait a minute, you gave us a wind speed, but what about the wind directions? That's just as important. We've even gotten those forms faxed to us from St. Croix. When everything else went down, the only thing he had left was his fax machine. So he faxed it to us, and it worked perfectly. We have also a couple hurricane chasers. They're brave souls. They go out there and send us reports. We don't promote that, we promote safety, but if they're out there, we'll accept the reports. And here's one here from, these are a couple hams, the storm study team, John Van Pelt and Danny Munster. And here's another one. This was during Hurricane Charlie, and this is a very well-known hurricane chaser named Mark Saduth and Jesse Bass from the HURT team. That's H-I-R-T, not H-U-R-T. And I remember when, by the way, Mark just got his amateur radio license. Back then during Charlie, he didn't have it, so he called me on his cell phone. And he was, you could hear the wind noise in the background. He had parked his truck underneath the overpass, and the winds were blowing 145 miles per hour. And he's screaming in there, and he says, "I'm never, ever gonna do this again." He was back next year. We have some reports we never expect. There was a ham that was on a oil platform in the middle of the Gulf during what was then a tropical storm Cindy. And that's what it was classified at that time until we got all his reports and we verified that he was running some commercial weather equipment plus a handheld. How do you do that? How do you stand out in 100 mile per hour wind with a handheld anemometer? He says, "I just tuck it out the window." It would blow your hand off. But he was sending this reports, and then post-hurricane, it was actually, post-storm, it was actually upgraded to a hurricane. A lot of it based on these reports. And I know some people do D-Star, which is basically a digital form of radio that interconnects all these stations digitally. We don't have that here at the Hurricane Center. So a person named John Davis, WB4QDX, volunteered to coordinate a network of it, and that was fantastic. So we don't have the equipment, the antenna, or the personnel to man that specific mode yet. So what he did, and we tested it 2 years in a row, worked perfectly. We got, on one of our tests, we got over 50 reports. And I know that there's a D-Star Hurricane Net here. And what they do is they gather the reports, whether it's verbally, and they fill out their own form, or digitally through a system called DRATS. And that's all sent directly to us, and we print it out, and it's in the same format that the hurricane forecasters are using. So, can ham radio make a difference? Is ham radio too old? The technology too old? Well, many years ago, there was a very well-known TV reporter, last name Williams, who came in there and he says, "You guys were all a bunch of dinosaurs." This is this old technology. I mean, we have satellite phones now. I said, "Really?" I said, "Well, Mr. Williams," I said, "next time you're in Bermuda during Hurricane Fabian, why don't you go outside and call me on your satellite phone? Let me know what's going on." I'll tell you a little bit more about satellite phones and how that could not work sometimes. So our first hurricane, Hurricane Allen, was a major hurricane. It hit the island of St. Lucia. That's what started this whole thing. The first year that Dr. Neil Frank says, "We need some hams here." And then we get hit by this thing. It lasted 3 weeks. Hit St. Lucia. We were on the air on the Hurricane Watch Net, and the ham that was on there said, "We need help. Our island's destroyed. We need medical help." Just by coincidence, the British hospital ship called the HMS Glasgow was nearby, so we can be there within a day's sailing. But we need permission from the Prime Minister because you have independence from Great Britain. In about an hour, that ham had the Prime Minister over ham radio give permission to the HMS Glasgow for landing. Then later on, that same hurricane, now remember, this is the first year, we're green behind the ears. Here's some kid who's only 22 years old, a student at the university, trying to put this whole thing together. We were on the air 24/7 for 3 weeks. Then it hits dead on to Brownsville, Texas. And the last teletype communications from NWS Brownsville was, "God help us." And then we had a ham at that station with a car battery, wire antenna, call us back. Dr. Neil Frank sat there for hours at this hurricane made landfall. that cemented ham radio into the hurricane center. So no matter if we're having a very low few years, don't forget 1992, we had one hurricane, the first hurricane, came Cat 5 within about 18 hours, hit South Florida, causing incredible damage. I mean, and blew the roof off of my house, and 300,000 homes were severely damaged. The hams came in right after that, over 200 of them. As far up as New England, they came down and coordinated things, because there's a thing back then we didn't think about, it's called interoperability. You had the military there, you had the local police officers there, you had fire and rescue, and they're all communicating on different frequencies, different modes, all that. So then the Department of Emergency Management says, you know what, we're gonna put a ham at each command post in the center, and we're gonna link them up. And we did that for 2 weeks after that. And that helped quite a bit. How has ham radio impacted, other than the Hurricane Adrian story that Dr. Knapp said? Very quickly, we had in 1998 a hurricane named George, and as it came off the coast of Haiti, and this is 1998, we didn't have very good visuals of it. At that time, Cuba would not allow our planes to fly over their territory. And this Cuban hurricane forecaster, the only Cuban hurricane forecaster in Miami, Avila, was very animated. In the middle of the night, runs into the Radio Shack. He says, I want you to get a ham operator on the most eastern point of Cuba. I was like, what? You can't just pick out somebody. So, you know, we got on the air with the Civil Defense from Havana, and we said, excuse me, but we need a ham in the most eastern point of Cuba. The guy came back in Punto Este, on the most eastern point of Cuba. I said, we need your reports. We need to know what's going on. Because the eye had clouded over. We didn't know the tracking. He came on, he started screaming that he was in 2 feet of water in his house, standing on a chair, and he kept giving us the wind report in kilometers per hour, 88 kilometers per hour, 90 kilometers per hour. And Lixion standing behind me, he says, I don't need that. He says, I want the wind direction. And the guy in his last 3 words said, del sur, del sur, del sur, from the south. Lixion ran out of there. He says, that's all I need. I had no idea what happened. What just happened? Then the 11 o'clock news came on, and Max Mayfield's sitting there with a little piece of paper there. And it's one of our forms. I'm like, oh my God, I hope that we didn't make a mistake. He says, well, we just changed the forecast track of Hurricane George. It's actually going towards the north, towards the south. And it was based on that person's geographic location and his wind direction and the time. And that's how they recalculated that. So ham radio made a large impact on that. 2001, Hurricane Michelle. We were getting live reports from the Isle of Youth in Cuba. Okay? I don't know how he got them, but they were the actual radar coordinates from their radar system. So all night he was giving us the exact coordinates of that eye, and then we thought after it passed over Cuba, the southern half of the ice started opening up. And we thought center circulation is being lost and all that. And so we started getting some reports from a sailboat on a little island called Highborn Key. They were at dock. He kept saying he had readings of over 100 miles per hour. And the forecast was like, wait a minute, you know. They didn't have the plane up at that time. And the satellite pictures showed the southern half of the eye opening up. It was falling apart. And Max actually got on the ham radio and talked to him. He says, what type of weather equipment are you using? Is Radiophone. He says, okay, that's a good type of weather. And he kept going on at him. And at that time, the Bahamas Met Office was about to lower their hurricane warnings. And Max got on the phone, called the Bahamas, and said, don't. We have verified reports. You still have a hurricane coming. Later on, he explained to me all the dynamics of wind mass. Even though it may not be visible, that wind is still rotating in there. So there again, ham radio may help save some lives by keeping the hurricane warnings up until it went through the Bahamas. and that's the ham operator from inside his sailboat that called in all the reports. Another one that we made a big impact to was Hurricane Ivan, and this is also 2004. And on the bottom it says amateur radio ham operators throughout the Caribbean region, and those working as part of the National Hurricane Center's WX4NHC and the Hurricane WatchNet. Okay, were indispensable in providing critical reports as Ivan moved through the Windward Islands and across the Caribbean Sea. And a lot of that also came through from Grenada, when it hit Grenada, and the VOIP as well, that link that we didn't have. Of course, the Big Easy, when Hurricane Katrina hit them and killed 1,833 people. And we were on the air there for several days through that. And we were one of the first to relay when the Superdome started losing its roof. One of the first reports came through. We went across our hallway there to the FEMA office. They have a FEMA office liaison to Washington, D.C. right there at the Hurricane Center. That was the first time they had heard about it too. And that came through ham radio. And similar situation happened as happened in 1980 during Hurricane Allen, when NWS lost all communications with a couple of their offices. One was Slidell, and they had lost all of their communications equipment. You know, some of it's called AWIPs, and some of their satellites were lost. And we got a message from headquarters at NWS says we need to communicate with them. So we stayed up on the air for 6 hours with them as Hurricane Katrina went over them and got live reports from them with wind speeds and barometric pressure and all that. And then after that, for all of their, they have 41 people in there that were trapped because they couldn't get out. All the trees were down, and they wanted to know about their families. So we stayed there until they were able to communicate that their families were okay. Those were some of the actual handwritten reports. You can barely read it because we were kind of in a hurry and nervous at that time. So can we help in other natural disasters? Well, we did. We went when the earthquake hit Haiti and killed about 300,000 people. University of Miami knew about our work during hurricanes. They had sent 140 doctors and medical staff down there. They had built one of the largest post-war trauma hospitals. Okay? And they sent the doctors down there with 40 satellite phones and 140 GMRS walkie-talkies. Well, one of the things about hams, it's not that they know how to use a walkie-talkie or an appliance, but they are disciplined. They know how to network. So those hams set up a network that became the 911 for Haiti, right in the center there at the airport, right inside that trauma hospital. We were the first to communicate to the hospital ship, the Comfort, which is about 2 miles offshore. We coordinated all of the helicopter pickups and drop-offs because they had no land-based communications able to do that at that time. And then we interconnected all of the field hospitals by other organizations that came in. That all they had, one of them had one ham, but all he had was a VHF walkie-talkie. So we set up a command center there for him and relayed all of his needs back and forth. Then we coordinated all the private charter flights for our teams to go back and forth into Haiti. And the supply chain, when they ran out of batteries, it would send us a message and we coordinated and communicate back to the University of Miami in Miami what the needs were then. And the hams, they brought their unique skills. I mean, we had a federal officer as part of our group. He's a ham. The ex-captain of the Chicago police. We had several military veterans, part of the MARS system, military-affiliated radio system, that came in with their unique skills, which helped incredibly because the HF wind link, they have military frequencies for that. Very little interference. The messages would get through. And in the center of the pink shirt, we had one of our valuable player, HH2JR, Jean-Robert Gallier, who I've known for 31 years. And he was so good because when we had problems getting our license and permission to operate there, he hand carried all of our licenses down to their FCC and had them sign off each one personally. And of course, the doctors, many times the doctors themselves got on the air and talked to doctors over here. We have a system, we have a patient that has this type of an injury. These are the complications. What can we do? Let's collaborate on it. And they did that not just in Haiti, but they did that for many of the other organizations volunteer there. So this is why we do it. We volunteer our time, our skills for many hours. Our group has been there for tens of thousands of hours. And it's because we care. We care about all people. We have no borders. Ham radio does not have any borders. And I will tell you, I'll finish off with a little story that really touched my heart about a little 3-year-old girl affected by the earthquake in Haiti. And this was from George Rydell, N1EZZ, which was on Team 4 during the Haiti mission. And he is sending this report. We had situation reports sent to us via WinLink. And that night, he sent this report, and I'll read it to you word for word here. And it says, oops. Sorry about that, I gotta scroll down. He says here, this is a birthday party for a three-year-old girl at the University of Miami Haiti Field Hospital. He says, about midnight one night, a bunch of trauma nurses stopped by at the side of the communications shack. They asked me if I wanted to go to a birthday party in the pediatric recovery ward. He says, there was a 3-year-old girl there, and today was her birthday. So we all went together to the main supply tent first and found a bunch of clean donated toys. So we picked up a few toys with us, and the lady in pink was the girl's mother and gave her the toys. He says, I must confess, when I got back to my tent, I cried like a baby. So this is why we do what we do. Thank you very much.